Hey there. Tonight we're stepping into one of Greek mythology's most haunting tales, a story that tries to answer the oldest question humanity has ever asked. Why do we suffer? Why, if the gods are powerful and the world was once perfect, is life filled with pain, disease, heartbreak, and loss? The answer, according to the ancient Greeks, lies with a woman, a jar, and a single moment of crushing curiosity. This is the story of Pandora's box. Though you should know right from the start it wasn't actually a box at all, but we'll get to that. If this kind of storytelling helps you rest, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it truly brings you peace. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. It's always strangely comforting to see who else is out there, drifting off to the same quiet story. So dim the lights, let the stillness settle in, close your eyes if you'd like, and let us journey back to a time before suffering, before death as we know it, before humans understood what it meant to lose something precious. Let us begin at the beginning, in an age of gold. Before we dive deep into Pandora's tale, it's worth taking a moment to understand the world into which this story was born. The ancient Greeks who first told this myth, who passed it down through generations, who shaped it and reshaped it until it became the version we know today, were people not so different from us. They looked at the world around them and saw beauty, yes, but also tremendous suffering. They watched children die of fevers. They saw crops fail and communities starve. They experienced war, plague, heartbreak, betrayal. All the things that make human life difficult. And like us, they asked why. Why does the world work this way? Why, if there are gods who supposedly care about us, do terrible things happen to good people? Why is life such a struggle? The Greeks developed an entire cosmology to answer these questions. A vast, interconnected web of stories about gods and titans, heroes and monsters, creation and destruction. Each myth was a piece of a larger puzzle, an attempt to make sense of existence. And Pandora's story sits right at the heart of that puzzle, addressing perhaps the most fundamental question of all: where did evil come from? Our primary source for this tale is a poet named Hesiod, who lived around the 8th or 7th century before the Common Era. That's roughly 2,700 years ago, give or take. Hesiod was a farmer in a region called Boeotia in central Greece. He wasn't nobility. He wasn't a warrior or a king. He was, by his own account, a shepherd who became a poet after an encounter with the Muses, those divine spirits of inspiration. Hesiod wrote 2 major works that survive to this day. The first, Theogony, is about the origins of the gods, their genealogies, their wars, their eventual establishment of the cosmic order. The second, Works and Days, is more practical, offering advice on farming, sailing, and living a moral life. It's in Works and Days that we get the fullest version of Pandora's story, though she appears in Theogony as well, unnamed but clearly the same figure. Hesiod was writing during what scholars call the archaic period of Greece, a time of significant cultural and social change. The old Bronze Age civilizations had collapsed centuries earlier, and Greek society was rebuilding itself, establishing the city-states that would eventually give birth to democracy, philosophy, drama, and so much else. It was a time of both possibility and uncertainty, and the myths reflected that tension. Hesiod himself seems to have been a bit pessimistic about the human condition. He believed he was living in the Iron Age, the worst of all ages, a time when humans were degraded, when justice was forgotten, when life was an endless grind of labor and suffering. And Pandora's story in his telling explains how we got here, how we fell from a better state into the broken world he knew. But here's the fascinating thing about myths. They're never just one thing. They're not simple moral lessons with clear, unambiguous meanings. They're complex, layered, full of contradictions and ambiguities. They mean different things to different people, different things in different contexts. And Pandora's story is no exception. Some read it as a cautionary tale about curiosity. Others see it as an explanation for the existence of evil. Some view it as a misogynistic attack on women. Others reclaim it as a story about the human drive for knowledge. Some focus on the evils that escaped. Others focus on the hope that remained. All of these interpretations have validity. All of them reveal something true about the story, about the culture that created it, about the questions humans have been asking since we first developed the capacity to wonder why things are the way they are. So as we journey into this tale tonight, I invite you to hold it lightly, to let it wash over you, to notice what resonates, what troubles you, what makes you think. This is a story that's been told for thousands of years, and it will continue to be told long after we're gone, because it touches something fundamental in the human experience. The question of suffering, the question of hope, the question of what it means to be human in a world that seems designed to break us. Let's begin. Picture, if you will, a world almost unrecognizable to us now. A world where humans lived not in fear or want, but in a kind of gentle, perpetual spring. This was the Golden Age, the first era of humanity, and it existed long before Pandora ever drew breath, long before her story began, long before anyone even conceived of the idea that the world could be anything other than paradise. The Golden Age was presided over not by Zeus, but by his father Cronus, the titan who ruled before the Olympians seized power. And under Cronus, the world was soft, kind, generous in ways we can barely imagine now. The earth gave freely, trees bent low with fruit, ripe and sweet, requiring no cultivation. Fields produced grain without the need for ploughing. Rivers ran clear and cool, and the weather never turned harsh. There were no seasons as we understand them, no winter's bite, no scorching summer that withered crops. Just endless, gentle spring. Imagine waking each morning to birdsong, to the scent of flowers that never faded, to warmth that was never oppressive. Imagine stepping outside your dwelling, whatever form it took, and finding breakfast growing on the nearest tree. Figs, perhaps, or pomegranates or apples that tasted sweeter than anything we know today. Imagine never having to worry about where your next meal would come from, because the next meal was always there, abundant, free for the taking. The rivers and springs ran with water so pure and sweet that drinking it was a pleasure, not just a necessity. Some accounts even suggest that milk and honey flowed in certain streams, though this might be poetic exaggeration. But the point is clear. Nature was not an adversary to be conquered, not a force to be bent to human will. Nature was a partner, a provider, a mother who cared for her children without asking anything in return. Humans in this age did not work, not because they were lazy, but because there was simply no need. Food appeared as if conjured. Shelter was unnecessary when the air was always temperate. There were no storms, no droughts, no floods. Nature itself seemed designed to cradle humanity in comfort. Think about what that means. No one had to spend hours in the hot sun tilling soil. No one had to plant and weed and water and pray for rain. No one had to harvest and store and ration. No one had to hunt animals or butcher them or preserve the meat for lean times. All of that labor, all of that worry, all of that calculation about whether you'd have enough to survive simply didn't exist. And without the need for labor, without the pressure of survival, humans had time. Time to think, time to create, time to simply be. Some accounts suggest that the people of the Golden Age spent their days in song and dance, in celebration, in communion with the gods and with one another. They created art not for money or fame, but for the pure joy of creation. They told stories, played games, made music. And death, when it came, was not the violent, painful thing we know today. People lived for centuries, their bodies never truly aging in the way ours do. They remained youthful, vital, strong. There was no gradual decline, no slow loss of faculties, no indignity of becoming dependent on others. They were healthy and whole right up until the end. And when their time finally ended, it was like falling asleep. One night, after a day like any other, they would lie down and simply not wake up. There was no pain, no fear, no drawn-out process of dying. Just a peaceful transition from one state to another. Their spirits did not vanish but remained on earth as benevolent guardians, watching over the living with kindness. They became what the Greeks called daimons, spiritual beings that protected communities and individuals from harm. Imagine a world where death was not something to fear, where it was not associated with suffering, with loss, with grief, where it was simply a change, like the sun setting at the end of a perfect day, knowing it would rise again somewhere else, in some other form. There was no disease, no plague swept through communities, No fevers ravaged children, no cancers ate away at the body from within. The very concept would have been incomprehensible. Bodies simply did not betray themselves in that way. You didn't wake up with mysterious pains, didn't watch loved ones waste away, didn't have to make impossible choices about treatment or comfort. Health was the default state, the only state, and it continued unbroken for centuries. Humans and gods walked among one another, not as master and servant, though the gods were certainly more powerful, but almost as neighbors. The divine was accessible, present, woven into the fabric of daily life. If you needed guidance, you might simply ask a passing deity. If you wished to give thanks, the gods were there to receive it. The relationship was reciprocal, warm. There was trust between mortals and immortals. Picture a conversation between a human and a god taking place casually beside a river. The god might be in human form or might appear in their divine aspect, radiant but not terrifying. The human feels no fear, only respect and affection. They speak as friends might speak, sharing news, offering advice, enjoying each other's company. This was normal in the Golden Age. The boundaries between divine and mortal were permeable, crossable. But perhaps most remarkable was the absence of greed, of envy, of violence. Humans had no reason to covet what their neighbors possessed because everyone had enough. More than enough. There was no scarcity to drive competition, no lack to create desperation. If you wanted something, it was available. If you needed help, it was given freely. There were no wars, no armies, no weapons designed to kill other humans. The very idea would have seemed absurd. Why would you harm another person? What could you possibly gain from it that you didn't already have? There were no murders, no thefts, no assaults. Crime itself was a concept that had not yet been born. People lived in harmony not just with nature, but with one another. Disputes, if they arose at all, were resolved through discussion, through understanding, through compromise. Kindness was the default. Generosity came naturally. If someone needed something and you had it, of course you shared. That's just what you did. The idea of hoarding, of keeping resources for yourself when others lacked them, simply didn't occur to anyone. Think about the psychology of living in such a world. Think about how it would shape your mind, your personality, your relationships. Without fear of scarcity, without competition, without the need to constantly guard what you have against those who might take it, you would be free. Free in a way we can barely comprehend. Free to be generous, to be kind, to be open, to trust. There would be no suspicion, no paranoia, no need to lock your doors, guard your possessions, watch your back. You could walk anywhere, speak to anyone, offer help without wondering if you were being taken advantage of. The default assumption would be that everyone meant well because everyone did mean well. There was no reason not to. It sounds almost too perfect, doesn't it? Too good to be real. And in a way, that's the point. The Golden Age wasn't meant to last. It was a memory, a dream of what had been lost. A way for the ancient Greeks to process their own suffering by imagining a time when suffering did not exist. Some scholars have suggested that the Golden Age myth might be a cultural memory of an actual historical period, perhaps the early Neolithic, when agriculture first developed and food became more abundant. Others see it as a purely mythological construct, a paradise never meant to be taken literally. Still others interpret it psychologically, as a representation of childhood, that brief period before we become aware of mortality, before we understand that the world is dangerous and we are vulnerable. All of these interpretations have merit. The Golden Age can be many things at once: memory, metaphor, myth, and yearning for something we've lost or perhaps never had. Because the Golden Age did end. When Zeus overthrew his father Cronus in the great war called the Titanomachy, when the younger gods seized power from the older generation, the world began to change. Slowly at first. The Silver Age that followed was diminished. Humans still lived long lives, but they were no longer immortal. They needed to work, though the work was light. And crucially, they began to turn away from the gods. Worship waned, respect faded, and the gods noticed. In the Silver Age, mothers kept their children at home for 100 years, coddling them, protecting them from the world. And when these children finally emerged as adults, they were immature, foolish, unable to regulate their own behavior. They insulted the gods, forgot to make sacrifices, grew arrogant and thoughtless. Zeus, disgusted by this generation, destroyed them utterly. He buried them beneath the earth, where they became lesser spirits, blessed but hidden, their names forgotten. Zeus created a third race, the Bronze Age, made from ash trees, violent and war-loving. These were men of tremendous strength and ferocity, who knew nothing but conflict. They wore bronze armor, lived in bronze houses, used bronze weapons. They delighted in battle, in bloodshed, in proving their dominance, and eventually, inevitably, they destroyed themselves. Their love of war led them to kill one another until none remained. They descended to Hades unnamed, unmourned, leaving no legacy but ruins and bones. Then came the heroic age, a brief resurgence where demigods walked the earth and great deeds were done. This was the age of heroes we know from other myths. Heracles with his 12 labors, Perseus who slew Medusa, Theseus who killed the Minotaur, Jason and his Argonauts seeking the Golden Fleece. This was the age of the Trojan War, of Achilles and Hector and Odysseus. For a time, it seemed humanity might climb back toward greatness. But even that faded. The heroes died, their children were lesser than they were, and the age passed into memory and song. And finally came the Iron Age, the age in which the poet Hesiod, our primary source for all these stories, believed he himself lived. An age of toil, of suffering, of constant struggle. An age where brother betrayed brother, where parents grew old and were dishonored by their children, where might made right and justice was forgotten. An age where humans were born with grey hair, already worn down by the weight of existence. An age where the gods had withdrawn, where divine aid was rare, where humans were left largely to fend for themselves. Hesiod describes the Iron Age with genuine despair. He writes that men will dishonor their aging parents, will refuse to repay the cost of their upbringing. He writes that city will fight city, that oaths will mean nothing, that the good will suffer while the wicked prosper. He writes that eventually, the last remnants of virtue personified as the goddesses Eidos, shame, modesty, and Nemesis, righteous indignation, will abandon humanity altogether, leaving us with nothing but sorrow. It's a bleak vision, but it's also recognizable. Hesiod was looking at the world around him, seeing war and corruption and inequality, and trying to make sense of it. The myth of the ages gave him a framework. Things used to be better, and they've been getting progressively worse. We're living in the worst age, but at least now we understand why. This is the world Pandora would help create. Though to be fair to her, she was only playing the role she was designed for. She was, after all, never meant to be a blessing. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To understand Pandora, we must first understand the Titan who made her necessary, the one who loved humanity enough to doom himself for their sake. The Firebringer, the Forethinker, Prometheus. Prometheus was not like other Titans. Most of his kind had sided against Zeus in the Great War, and for their rebellion they were cast down into Tartarus, the deepest pit of the underworld, to suffer in eternal darkness. But Prometheus had chosen differently. He had seen, with that gift of foresight his name promised, that Zeus would win, and so he sided with the Olympians, and when the war ended, he was spared. His name, Prometheus, means forethought, the one who thinks ahead, who plans, who sees the consequences before they unfold. It was both his greatest gift and ultimately his curse. To see the future, to understand what's coming, is a tremendous advantage, but it's also a burden, because knowing what will happen doesn't always mean you can change it. Sometimes it just means you have to watch it unfold, aware and helpless. Prometheus was the son of the Titan Epimetheus and the Oceanid Clymene, making him part of the old guard, the generation that ruled before Zeus and his siblings took power. His brothers were Atlas, who would eventually be condemned to hold up the heavens, Menoetius, who was struck down by Zeus's thunderbolt and cast into Tartarus for his violence, and Epimetheus, whom we'll discuss shortly. A family of titans, each with their own fate, their own story. But Prometheus stood apart. While his brothers followed predictable paths, Prometheus was harder to categorize. He was clever, yes, but not merely cunning. He was strategic, but not self-serving. He had a quality that was rare among both titans and gods, genuine compassion for beings weaker than himself. Prometheus had a particular fondness for humanity. In some versions of the myth, he is even credited with creating humans himself, molding them from clay, breathing life into their lungs, shaping them in the image of the gods. The playwright Aeschylus, in his tragedy Prometheus Bound, expands on this, having Prometheus claim that he not only created humans, but taught them everything that makes civilization possible: writing, mathematics, agriculture, medicine, science, architecture. Every advance, every skill, every bit of knowledge that elevates humans above mere animals came from Prometheus. Whether he created them or not, he certainly championed them. He saw in humans something worth protecting, a potential worth nurturing. Perhaps he saw them as his children, even if he didn't literally fashion them from clay. Perhaps he saw in them a kind of innocence, a vulnerability that called to something deep within him. Or perhaps he simply believed they deserved better than the life the gods had planned for them. And Zeus did not share this sentiment. To Zeus, humans were useful, creatures who could worship, make sacrifices, build temples. They honored the gods, which pleased the divine ego, but they were not equals. They were not even particularly important in the cosmic scheme of things. They were tools at best, pets at worst, amusing when they were obedient, irritating when they forgot their place. Zeus expected worship, but he did not feel obligated to care for those who worshipped him. The gods deserved the best of everything because they were gods. Humans deserved whatever Zeus decided to give them, which might be much or might be nothing at all, depending on his mood. This fundamental disagreement, this clash of values between Prometheus and Zeus, would define their relationship and ultimately lead to catastrophe. The relationship between Prometheus and Zeus began to sour at a place called Mecone, sometimes called Sicyon in other accounts. This was where gods and humans gathered for a great sacrifice, a ritual offering meant to honor the divine. In those days, when an animal was slaughtered as an offering, the question arose, which parts should go to the gods, and which to the humans? It seems like a simple matter of protocol, but Prometheus saw an opportunity. The sacrifice was a large ox, a valuable animal full of meat and fat and bones. Prometheus took it upon himself to divide the offering, and he did so with characteristic cleverness. He butchered the great ox carefully, separating it into two distinct portions. The first portion he wrapped in the animal's stomach. Now, if you've never seen an ox stomach, it's not an appealing sight. It's lumpy, grayish, wet, and rather disgusting to look at. It's the kind of thing you'd normally throw away or, at best, clean thoroughly before using for something like sausage casings. Prometheus took this unappetizing organ and used it to wrap all the best parts of the ox, the tender meat, the edible organs, the nutritious bits, everything a hungry human would want to eat. But from the outside, it just looked like a pile of stomach lining. The second portion he wrapped in glistening white fat. He arranged the ox bones carefully, covering them completely in this beautiful, gleaming fat. From the outside, it looked incredible. Rich, abundant, clearly the better choice. Any god, or human for that matter, would look at that fat-wrapped bundle and think it contained the best parts of the animal. But it didn't. Beneath that attractive exterior was nothing but bones and gristle, inedible and worthless as food. Prometheus presented both portions to Zeus and invited the king of the gods to choose. One portion for the gods, he said, and one for the humans. Choose whichever you prefer, mighty Zeus. Now, here's where the story gets interesting, because different sources give us different interpretations of what happened next. In some versions, Zeus was genuinely fooled. His vanity led him to pick the prettier option without investigating further. He saw the beautiful fat, assumed it contained the best meat, and claimed it for the gods. Only after unwrapping it did he discover the deception. The bones mocked him from beneath their fatty covering, and Zeus realized he'd been outsmarted by a titan. But in other versions, Zeus knew exactly what Prometheus was doing. He saw through the trick immediately. Those divine eyes missed nothing. He knew the fat-wrapped package contained only bones, and he chose it anyway, deliberately, consciously, because accepting the inferior offering gave him the excuse he needed to do what he'd been wanting to do all along: punish humanity. The second interpretation is in many ways more frightening, because it suggests Zeus was not a proud god who made a mistake. It suggests he was a calculating tyrant, looking for justification to hurt those weaker than himself. And when Prometheus handed him that justification on a silver platter, Zeus took it gratefully. Regardless of whether Zeus was fooled or playing along, the result was the same. From that day forward, when humans made sacrifices to the gods, they burned the bones and fat as offerings and kept the good meat for themselves. This became the standard practice in Greek religious ritual, and it persisted for centuries. Every time an ox or sheep or goat was sacrificed at a Greek temple, the worshippers would remember Prometheus's trick, even if they didn't fully understand the story behind it. But Zeus was furious, or at least he performed fury convincingly. This was not mere disobedience. This was a titan making a mockery of the king of the gods, implying that Zeus was either stupid enough to be fooled or weak enough to accept being cheated. Either way, it was intolerable. Zeus's revenge was swift and cruel. He took away fire. Now, you might not think that's such a terrible punishment. After all, humans had lived without fire before, hadn't they? They could learn to live without it again, but no, not really. Because fire was more than warmth on a cold night. Fire was civilization itself. Fire was the difference between humans and animals. Fire allowed humans to cook food, which made it easier to digest and unlocked nutrients that raw food kept locked away. Cooked food led to better nutrition, which led to larger brains, which led to greater intelligence. Fire kept predators at bay. No animal willingly approaches a blazing fire, which meant humans could sleep safely at night, could protect their young, could establish permanent settlements without constant fear of being eaten. Fire was light in the darkness. It extended the day, allowed humans to see at night, to work and socialize and create, even after the sun set. Fire was a tool for forging metals, shaping the world, building the instruments of civilization. Swords, plows, wheels, all required fire to create. Fire was warmth in winter. Without it, humans in colder climates would freeze or at minimum suffer greatly during the cold months. Fire was a way to clear land, to signal across distances, to purify water. Fire was sacred, symbolic of the divine spark, the thing that separated the civilized from the savage. And Zeus took it away. Just like that, he forbade fire to humanity, hid it in the heavens where mortals could not reach it. Suddenly, humans were plunged back into a primitive state. They ate raw meat and sickened. They huddled in the darkness, afraid of every sound. They couldn't forge tools, couldn't protect themselves adequately. They were cold, vulnerable, diminished. Prometheus watched this unfold with mounting horror. He saw humans, these beings he cared for so deeply, suffering because of a game he had played with Zeus. The trick with the sacrifice had been meant to help them, to secure the good meat for their consumption. But it had backfired catastrophically. Zeus's punishment was far worse than anything Prometheus had anticipated. He could have left it there, could have accepted that he'd overreached, that Zeus had won this round, that humanity would simply have to adapt to a life without fire. It would have been the safe choice, the smart choice even. Zeus had made his point. Pushing back further would only invite more punishment, but Prometheus couldn't do it. He couldn't stand by and watch humans suffer when he had the power to help them. His compassion, his love for humanity, overrode his sense of self-preservation, so he made a decision that would define the rest of his existence. He decided to steal the fire back. It was an audacious plan, bordering on suicidal. The fire of the gods was kept on Mount Olympus itself, in the workshop of Hephaestus, the divine blacksmith. To steal it, Prometheus would have to infiltrate the home of the gods, take something Zeus had explicitly forbidden to mortals, and bring it back down to earth. If he was caught, the consequences would be unthinkable. But Prometheus was nothing if not clever. He took a hollow fennel stalk, the kind with a pithy interior that burns slowly. He climbed to Olympus, moving quietly, carefully, waiting for the right moment. Some accounts say he waited until Hephaestus was away from his forge. Others suggest he simply moved too quickly to be stopped. Either way, he succeeded. He took a burning ember from the divine fire, placed it inside the fennel stalk where it would continue to burn slowly, without consuming the stalk itself, and carried it back down the mountainside. Back to earth. back to humanity, and he gave it to them. The fire of the gods, stolen from the heavens, placed in human hands, fire returned to the world, hearths blazed once more, forges roared to life, the darkness retreated. Humans could cook their food again, could warm themselves, could see at night, could shape metal and create tools. They could defend themselves from predators. They could build, create, advance, and humanity, grateful beyond measure, thrived. They honored Prometheus, remembered his sacrifice, told stories about the Titan who had risked everything to help them. In Athens, there was even an annual torch race held in his honor, where runners would pass a lit torch between them, never letting the flame go out, racing to the altar of Athena on the Acropolis. It was a ritual remembrance of the gift Prometheus had given, a celebration of the fire that made civilization possible. But Zeus knew. Of course Zeus knew. Zeus always knew. The king of the gods saw everything from his throne on Mount Olympus. He saw the smoke rising from human settlements, saw the glow of campfires against the night sky, saw the forges burning bright and hot, and he knew exactly who was responsible. This was the second time Prometheus had defied him. The second time this Titan had made Zeus look either foolish or weak. And this offense was even worse than the first, because it was direct, open rebellion. Prometheus had taken something Zeus had explicitly denied to humanity and given it to them anyway. The punishment would need to be severe, exemplary, something that would ensure no one, god or titan or mortal, ever dared to cross Zeus again. Something that would make Prometheus regret every moment of his compassion, every second of his defiance. Zeus decided that Prometheus would suffer, not for a day, not for a year, but forever, and humanity would suffer too, in a different way, because Zeus understood that the best way to hurt Prometheus was to hurt those he loved. The stage was set for punishment on a cosmic scale. Zeus ordered Prometheus to be taken to the ends of the earth, to the Caucasus Mountains, a desolate place of jagged stone and howling wind. There, Prometheus was bound. Chained to a rock or pillar, accounts vary, but the result was the same. Inescapable, eternal, the Caucasus Mountains were chosen deliberately. They represented the edge of the known world, the boundary between civilization and wilderness. By binding Prometheus there, Zeus was sending a message. This Titan who loved humanity so much would spend eternity far from those he tried to help. He would see no human faces, hear no grateful prayers, receive no acknowledgement of his sacrifice. Only stone and wind and his own screaming would keep him company. Hephaestus himself, the gentle god of the forge, was forced to do the binding. Some accounts say he wept as he worked, hammering the chains into the stone, knowing the Titan who had once been his ally was about to suffer unimaginably. Hephaestus understood what Prometheus had done and why. Fire was Hephaestus's domain, his gift, his craft. In stealing fire, Prometheus had honored the work of the forge, had recognized its value to humanity. But Zeus's will was absolute, and Hephaestus had no choice but to obey. Imagine the scene. The cold mountain peak, wind whipping across bare rock, Hephaestus working with his divine tools, his limp, his scarred hands moving with practiced precision despite the tears on his face. Prometheus standing proud, defiant even now, refusing to beg or plead or show fear. The chains forged by Hephaestus himself, unbreakable even by Titan strength, and Zeus's servants, Kratos, might, and Baia, force, standing watch to ensure the task was completed. In Aeschylus's play Prometheus Bound, we see this moment dramatized. Kratos is harsh, mocking, eager to see Prometheus humiliated. He represents the brutality of power, force without compassion. Baia is silent, the embodiment of violence itself. And Hephaestus is reluctant, sympathetic, but ultimately obedient to his father's command. There you stand, Kratos tells Prometheus, the friend of man, betrayer of the gods. How do you think your beloved humans will help you now? How will they repay your sacrifice? They cannot even reach this place, let alone free you from these chains. And Prometheus, even in that moment, even knowing what was coming, responded with defiance. I knew this would happen, he said. I saw it coming, but I chose compassion anyway. I chose to help those weaker than myself, even knowing the price I would pay, and I would do it again. Once Prometheus was secured, unable to move, unable to flee, Zeus sent his eagle. This was not a normal eagle, not one of the birds that soar through mortal skies hunting rabbits and fish. This was a divine creature, massive beyond comprehension, with talons like curved swords and a beak sharp enough to pierce even a titan's flesh. Some accounts describe it as golden, gleaming like the sun. Others say it was dark as night, a shadow with wings. But all agree it was terrible. Every day at dawn the eagle would come. Its shadow would fall across Prometheus, and he would know what was about to happen. There would be no surprise, no mercy of unconsciousness or forgetfulness. Every single day he would be aware, anticipating, dreading. The eagle would land on his chest, its weight crushing, its claws digging into his flesh. And then it would tear into his side, ripping through skin and muscle, breaking through the cage of his ribs, seeking the organ within. His liver. The ancient Greeks believed the liver was the seat of emotion, of passion, of the vital force that drives a person. It was associated with anger, courage, desire, all the hot feelings that make us alive. To have it torn out was to have the very essence of yourself destroyed. It was violation on the deepest level, a destruction not just of the body, but of the self. And Prometheus would scream. How could he not? Even titans feel pain, perhaps especially titans, whose bodies are tougher, more resilient, designed to withstand far more than mortal flesh. The pain would be beyond description, beyond imagining. The eagle would feed slowly, savoring its meal, ripping chunks of liver from his body, while he was still conscious, still aware. There was no merciful passing out, no escape into shock or unconsciousness. He experienced every second of it, every tearing of flesh, every breaking of bone, every pull and rip and swallow. And when the eagle finished, when it had eaten its fill of the organ that would make any mortal being dead a dozen times over, it would fly away. Back to Zeus, presumably. Back to wherever divine eagles go when they're not engaged in eternal torture. And Prometheus would be left alone, torn open, bleeding, destroyed. But he was immortal. And that immortality, which might in other circumstances be a blessing, was here the cruelest torture imaginable. Because by nightfall, his liver would begin to regenerate. Slowly, painfully, the organ would grow back. Tissue reforming, blood vessels reconnecting, nerves regrowing and firing with fresh agony. By dawn, it would be whole again, complete, ready to be devoured once more. And the eagle would return, day after day after day. No weekends, no holidays, no relief. Every dawn brought the eagle. Every day brought the same unspeakable suffering. Every night brought regeneration, which meant every morning brought the torture anew. Think about what that does to a person, even an immortal titan. The anticipation alone would be maddening. Watching the sun rise, knowing what was coming, unable to stop it or even prepare for it in any meaningful way. The first hour of every day would be spent dreading the moment the eagle's shadow fell across the rock. And after the eagle came, after the feeding, there would be the long hours of regeneration. Feeling your body knit itself back together, knowing that this healing was not rescue, but simply preparation for tomorrow's torture. Knowing that you were being made whole only so you could be destroyed again. This was not a punishment with an end date. This was forever. Or at least it was meant to be. Zeus had decreed it, and what Zeus decreed was law. Prometheus would hang there until the end of time itself, paying for his compassion, paying for his defiance, paying for daring to love humanity more than he feared the king of the gods. And yet Prometheus did not break. He did not beg for mercy. He did not renounce his love for humanity or regret giving them fire. He did not offer Zeus the information he held, the prophecy of which mortal woman Zeus must not sleep with, lest she bear a son who would overthrow him. That prophecy was Prometheus's only leverage, the one piece of knowledge that could potentially secure his freedom. But he kept it to himself, using it not to bargain, but simply to deny Zeus the satisfaction of complete victory. Prometheus endured because he believed what he had done was right. He endured because he knew that somewhere below, beyond the mountains, across the seas, humans were using the fire he had given them to build, to create, to survive. They were making tools and weapons. They were cooking food and warming their homes. They were forging civilizations. And every time a human lit a fire, every time they used flame to improve their lives, they were proving that Prometheus's sacrifice had meaning. The playwright Aeschylus, in his dramatic treatment of the myth, gives Prometheus long speeches about all the things he taught humanity. Not just fire, but the foundations of civilization itself. He taught them to read the stars, to navigate by the heavens. He taught them mathematics and writing, giving them the tools to record knowledge and pass it between generations. He taught them medicine, how to mix healing herbs, how to treat wounds and sickness. He taught them architecture, how to build homes that would shelter them from the elements. He taught them agriculture beyond what they'd known, how to improve their crops, how to domesticate animals. He gave them the civilizing arts, everything that separates humans from beasts. And Zeus punished him for it because Zeus believed humans should remain ignorant, dependent, controlled. But there's another element to Prometheus's punishment that's often overlooked. In Aeschylus's version, Prometheus didn't just give humans fire and knowledge, he gave them something arguably more important: blind hope. He stopped humans from foreseeing their own doom. Before Prometheus's intervention, humans apparently could see their own deaths coming. They knew when and how they would die, lived with that knowledge hanging over them every day. Imagine how paralyzing that would be, how it would make every action feel futile. Why build anything if you know exactly when you'll die and leave it behind? Prometheus took that foresight away. He gave humans hope, blind and irrational, the belief that tomorrow might bring something better, even when there's no logical reason to think so. He gave them the ability to not think about death constantly, to push it to the back of their minds and focus on living. Some interpret this as a cruel trick, arguing that false hope is worse than no hope at all. But Prometheus clearly saw it as a gift. Hope makes life bearable. Hope makes it possible to keep going when logic says you should give up. And this is what Prometheus was being punished for caring too much, for loving humanity enough to defy the king of the gods, for believing that compassion was more important than obedience, that helping the weak was worth any personal cost. Centuries passed, literally centuries. Prometheus hung on that rock, enduring the daily torture, while the world below changed and evolved. The humans he had helped grew and spread and built civilizations. They developed art and music and philosophy. They told stories about him, the Titan who had sacrificed everything for their sake. In Athens, his cult became associated with potters and craftsmen, those who worked with fire daily and understood what the flame meant. But Prometheus remained bound. Zeus was not the forgiving type, and there was no indication that the punishment would ever end. Until, finally, a hero came. Heracles, son of Zeus himself, strongest of all mortals, demigod, with legendary strength. Heracles was in the middle of his famous 12 labors, those impossible tasks assigned to him as penance for a terrible crime. And during his travels, he came to the Caucasus Mountains. Some versions say it was coincidence. Others say Prometheus called out to him asking for help. Still others suggest that Zeus himself, after countless centuries, had grown tired of the punishment and was ready to show mercy, at least in this one instance. Perhaps even gods can hold a grudge for only so long. Either way, Heracles arrived at the rock where Prometheus was bound. He saw the Titan, saw the chains, saw the evidence of the daily torture. And Heracles, who understood suffering, who knew what it meant to be punished for actions that weren't entirely your fault, felt compassion. When the eagle came at dawn, Heracles was ready. He drew his bow, nocked an arrow, and when the divine bird swooped down for its daily meal, he shot it from the sky. The arrow, dipped in the poison of the Hydra, found its mark. The eagle fell, dead before it hit the ground. Then Heracles broke the chains. Those unbreakable bonds that had held Prometheus for centuries, Heracles shattered with his divine strength. Prometheus was free, but there was a condition, because with Zeus there was always a condition. Prometheus could go free, but he had to wear a ring made from his chains, with a piece of the rock from the Caucasus set in it. He would carry that reminder of his punishment forever, a symbol that he had been bound, and that Zeus's will, even when rescinded, left permanent marks. Prometheus agreed. How could he not? After centuries of torment, a ring was a small price to pay for freedom. And so Prometheus walked away from that desolate mountain, free at last. The torch races continued in Athens, honoring his gift of fire. The craftsmen continued their prayers, thanking the Titan who had given them their livelihood. And the stories continued to be told, generation after generation, about the one who sacrificed everything for humanity. But his suffering had not been in vain, because during those centuries of punishment, while Prometheus hung bound and bleeding, Zeus had been planning his revenge against humanity itself. He would give them a gift, a beautiful, terrible gift, a punishment wrapped in the form of a blessing. He would give them woman, the first woman, the one who would change everything. He would create Pandora. Zeus summoned Hephaestus once more. The god of the forge had just finished binding Prometheus, and now he was being asked to create something new. Not a weapon, not a tool, but a living being, a woman. The order came with specific instructions. This creation needed to be perfect, beautiful beyond compare, something that would captivate any man who saw her. But beneath that beauty, there needed to be something else, something that would bring ruin. Zeus called her a beautiful evil, kalonkakon in the original Greek. She was to be irresistible and destructive in equal measure. Hephaestus set to work in his divine workshop, deep within the volcanic heart of Mount Olympus, where the fires never died and the air shimmered with heat. The walls were lined with tools of every description, hammers and tongs and chisels, implements for shaping metal and stone and now clay. The floor was littered with the remnants of past projects, golden automatons that could move and think, bronze bulls that breathed fire, countless weapons and armor pieces for heroes and gods. But this project was different. This was not metalwork but sculpture, not craft but creation. Hephaestus was being asked to fashion not an object, but a person. The responsibility weighed on him, but he was nothing if not a master of his art. He took clay from the earth itself, the rich dark soil that gives birth to all growing things, mixing it with water until it reached the perfect consistency. Not too wet, not too dry, but malleable, responsive to his touch. He worked the clay carefully, kneading it, feeling for impurities, ensuring it was smooth and pure. Then he began to shape her. He started with the basic form, the armature of a human body, the skeleton of clay, if you will. He shaped legs, long and graceful, a torso proportioned according to divine standards of beauty, arms that would be both delicate and strong, and then the head. And this is where Hephaestus spent the most time because the face would be crucial. He molded her features carefully, the curve of her cheeks, the slope of her nose, the fullness of her lips, the arch of her brows. He gave her eyes that would hold depth, that would draw people in, that would seem to see into the soul of anyone who met her gaze. He crafted ears that would hear every word spoken around her, a mouth that would speak with persuasion and charm. He worked with the precision of a master craftsman, and when he was done, the figure before him was breathtaking, flawless in its beauty. Human, yes, but human in the way the gods imagined humans should be. Idealized, perfect. A work of art that breathed or would breathe once the divine spark of life was added. Hephaestus stepped back and surveyed his work. He felt a strange mixture of pride and unease, pride in his craftsmanship because this was perhaps the finest thing he had ever made, unease because he knew what Zeus intended for this creation, and it troubled him. But orders were orders, and the work was done. Zeus called the other gods to assemble, to witness the creation and to add their own gifts. Because Pandora, as she would be named, was to be a collaborative project. Each deity would contribute something, and the combination of all these divine gifts would create something unprecedented. Athena stepped forward first. The goddess of wisdom and war, helmeted and armored even here in the peaceful halls of Olympus, approached the still lifeless form. She brought with her a gown of shimmering silver, so finely woven it seemed to be made of moonlight itself. The fabric was divine work, woven on Athena's own loom with threads spun from starlight and dreams. She dressed Pandora carefully, fitting the gown to her form, and it flowed around her like water, catching the light, making her seem almost ethereal. But Athena's gift was not merely clothing. She taught Pandora the art of weaving itself, She placed the knowledge directly into Pandora's mind, as gods can do, giving her the skill to work a loom, to create fabric from thread, to make beautiful things with her hands. Weaving was one of the most respected crafts in ancient Greece, the domain of housewives and goddesses alike. Penelope wove while waiting for Odysseus. Athena herself competed with Arachne in a weaving contest. To be skilled at the loom was to be civilized, capable, valuable. Athena also placed an embroidered veil over Pandora's head, delicate and lovely, and crowned her with a garland of fresh flowers. The flowers were not simply decorative, they were symbols of youth, of vitality, of the spring that never fades. They would never wilt while Pandora wore them, would never lose their color or their scent. Then came Aphrodite, and if Athena's contribution was practical, Aphrodite's was purely about desire. The goddess of love and beauty glided forward, radiant as always, her very presence making the air seem warmer, the light softer. She looked at Pandora with an appraising eye, the way an artist might look at a canvas considering what was needed. Aphrodite reached out and touched Pandora's forehead, her lips, her hands, and as she touched, she bestowed a grace that went beyond mere physical beauty. She gave Pandora an irresistible allure, a quality that would make anyone who looked at her feel an immediate pull, a desire to be near her, to please her, to possess her attention. It was magic of a sort, though not the kind that required spells or potions. It was simply the amplification of natural attraction, taken to a divine extreme. She also gave Pandora longing, a yearning quality, a sense that she was always reaching for something just out of grasp. This would make her seem vulnerable, approachable, human, in a way that pure perfection never is. Men would want to comfort her, to fulfill whatever need she seemed to have. It was manipulative, but Aphrodite's gifts often were. The Graces appeared next, those divine attendants of beauty and charm. Aglaia, splendor; Euphrosyne, mirth; and Thalia, good cheer. They moved as one, dancing around Pandora, hanging golden necklaces around her throat. Each necklace was a work of art, wrought by Hephaestus' own hand, catching the light and throwing it back in dazzling patterns. The gold gleamed against the silver of her gown, and the effect was stunning. But the Graces' gift was not just jewelry. They imparted to Pandora a sense of joy, of lightness, the ability to make others feel at ease in her presence. She would be good company, pleasant to be around, the kind of person you'd invite to a feast because she'd make everyone else enjoy themselves more. This was a subtler gift than some of the others, but no less powerful. The Horae arrived, those goddesses of the seasons and the hours. Eunomia, order; Dike, justice; and Irene, peace. They brought with them a crown of spring flowers, more elaborate than the simple garland Athena had placed earlier, and they set it upon Pandora's head with ceremony and reverence. The crown was alive with blooms, each one perfect, each one symbolizing an aspect of the natural cycle. Roses for beauty, lilies for purity, violets for faithfulness. The Horae's gift was perhaps the most philosophical. They gave Pandora an understanding of time, of cycles, of the way things begin and begin again. They gave her patience, the ability to wait, to watch, to let things unfold in their proper order. This would make her seem wise, thoughtful, more than just a beautiful face. Peitho, the goddess of persuasion, came forward with a gift of her own. She touched Pandora's throat, her lips, and gave her a voice that would be impossible to resist. Not just pleasant to listen to, though it was that, but actively persuasive. When Pandora spoke, people would want to believe her, would want to agree with her, would find their objections melting away. This was the gift of rhetoric without the need for study, charm without the need for practice. And then, finally, came Hermes. The messenger god, the trickster, the god of thieves and liars and travelers, approached with a smile that suggested he was enjoying himself immensely. This was his kind of project. Chaos wrapped in beauty, a joke that would have consequences for millennia. Hermes leaned close to Pandora and spoke to her, though what he said no one else could hear. He gave her the voice of humanity, the ability to speak as mortals did, with all the nuance and complexity that human language possessed. But he also gave her something else. He gave her cunning. the ability to deceive, to dissemble, to say one thing while meaning another. He taught her how to lie convincingly, how to manipulate through words, how to get what she wanted through cleverness and misdirection. He gave her a mind that would always be working, always calculating, always looking for the angle. And most crucially, at Zeus's explicit command, Hermes gave her curiosity, endless, gnawing, insatiable curiosity, the need to know, to understand, to uncover secrets. He planted in her mind a question that would never fully be answered, an itch that could never be completely scratched. Why? 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 The question that drives all learning, all discovery, but also all trouble. This was perhaps the cruelest gift of all, though Hermes probably didn't see it that way. Curiosity is a wonderful thing in a world where satisfying it brings only knowledge, but in a world where some knowledge is dangerous, where some secrets are better left alone, curiosity becomes a curse. When all the gods had finished, when every gift had been bestowed, they stepped back to admire their collective work. Pandora stood before them, alive now, breathing, her eyes open and aware. She was stunning. Even the gods, who were accustomed to beauty, who themselves were perfect by definition, were struck by her. Wonder seized them as they looked upon this being they had created. She was human, but barely. She was more like a goddess in mortal form, the absolute pinnacle of what a woman could be. No real woman would ever look like this, act like this, be like this. She was an ideal, an impossibility made flesh. And they called her Pandora. All gifted, the one who had received gifts from every god. Zeus looked at her with satisfaction. This was exactly what he had wanted. A weapon that looked like a blessing, a punishment that would be welcomed with open arms. Humanity would accept Pandora gladly, and only later, too late, would they realize what she had brought with her. But there's a darker reading of her name that we should consider. An older interpretation. Some scholars believe Pandora wasn't originally all-gifted, but all-giving. That before Hesiod wrote his version of the story, before the patriarchal structure of Greek society fully took hold, Pandora might have been something else entirely. An earth goddess, a bringer of life, a figure more akin to Gaia, the earth herself, who gives all things to all beings. There's evidence for this in the archaeological record. Vase paintings from before Hesiod's time show a figure named Anesidora, she who sends up gifts, emerging from the earth with arms raised in blessing. This Anesidora is clearly a goddess, not a mortal woman. And she's associated with fertility, abundance, the generosity of the earth. If that's true, and we'll never know for certain, then Hesiod's tale represents a profound transformation, a shift from a goddess who gives to a woman who is given, from an active, powerful figure to a passive object, shaped by others for their own purposes, from someone who creates to someone who destroys. It's a fascinating lens through which to view the myth, and it suggests that Pandora's story might be older, stranger, and more complex than it first appears. It suggests that at some point in Greek cultural evolution, a beneficial earth goddess was reimagined as a dangerous mortal woman. Her gifts perverted into curses, her generosity recast as deception. This transformation reflects the increasing patriarchy of Greek society, the growing tendency to view women not as sources of life and abundance, but as sources of trouble and temptation. It's similar to the way Eve, in Christian tradition, is blamed for the fall, even though she was simply curious about knowledge. Both Pandora and Eve were punished by their respective cultures for being too inquisitive, too independent, too willing to take action. But we're dealing with Hesiod's version here, the one that survived, the one that became canonical. And in that version, Pandora was created explicitly as a punishment. Zeus himself called her a beautiful evil, kalon kakon in the original Greek. A being designed to be irresistible on the outside while carrying ruin within, because Pandora came with a gift of her own. Or rather, Zeus gave her a gift to carry, a gift for her future husband. A jar, a large storage vessel, a pythos in Greek, the kind used to hold grain or wine or oil. The kind that stood as tall as a person, with a heavy lid that required effort to remove. The kind that was sometimes used for burials, the body curled inside the clay vessel. the soul trapped or protected, depending on your perspective. This jar, Zeus told her, was special. A wedding gift, he said, for her and for the husband she would soon meet. It contained things precious and valuable, things that would be useful in her new life. But he gave her one very clear instruction: never open it. No matter how curious she became, no matter how much she wondered what was inside, she must keep the lid sealed. This was important, this was crucial, this was non-negotiable. And then Zeus smiled, because he knew exactly what he had done. He had created a woman with insatiable curiosity and given her a mystery she was forbidden to solve. He had built the trap perfectly, spring-loaded and ready to close. The only question was how long it would take. Hermes took Pandora by the hand, and together they descended from Olympus. Down, down, down from the realm of the gods to the world of mortals. Down to the green earth and the blue rivers and the settlements of humans who had no idea what was coming. Down to the home of a Titan who had been warned explicitly and repeatedly never to accept anything from Zeus. Down to Epimetheus, the brother of hindsight. The Titan who would forget everything he knew the moment he saw Pandora's face. Epimetheus was in every way the opposite of his brother Prometheus. Where Prometheus was forethought, Epimetheus was afterthought. Where Prometheus planned and schemed and saw consequences before they unfolded, Epimetheus acted on impulse, dealt with problems as they arose, and generally learned his lessons only after making mistakes. The names were not accidental. Their parents, the Titan Iapetus and the ocean nymph Clymene, had apparently possessed either great foresight themselves or a rather dark sense of humor. To name one son, the one who thinks before, and the other, the one who thinks after, was to set up a lifelong dynamic, a constant comparison, a relationship defined by complementary opposites. Imagine growing up as Epimetheus, always in the shadow of your brilliant, careful, strategic brother. Prometheus saw pitfalls before they arrived. Epimetheus stumbled into them and then wondered why he hadn't noticed they were there. Prometheus made plans that accounted for every variable. Epimetheus made decisions based on how he felt in the moment and hoped for the best. Prometheus was respected, admired, consulted. Epimetheus was tolerated, cleaned up after, forgiven repeatedly, for errors that could have been avoided if he'd just stopped to think. But for all his failings, Epimetheus was not malicious, he was not cruel or selfish or intentionally destructive. He was just impulsive, short-sighted, governed by emotion rather than reason. And in a family of titans, beings who were supposed to be wise and powerful and in control, this made him something of an embarrassment. The brothers had been given a task together once, at the very beginning of things, after the war between the Titans and the Olympians had ended. Zeus, newly in power, wanted the earth populated with creatures, animals of every kind, each suited to its environment, each with abilities that would allow it to survive and thrive. And he assigned this task to Prometheus and Epimetheus. It should have been a joint effort. Prometheus creating the plan, Epimetheus executing it, both working together to ensure every creature was properly equipped. But that's not what happened. Epimetheus, eager and enthusiastic as always, wanted to be useful, wanted to prove he could handle responsibility. So he volunteered to take charge of the distribution of traits while Prometheus oversaw other aspects of creation. And Prometheus, trusting his brother, perhaps hoping this would be an opportunity for Epimetheus to show what he could do, agreed. Epimetheus took to the task with gusto. He gave freely, generously, delighting in the creative process. To the birds he gave wings so they could soar above the earth, escaping predators and finding food from high perches. To the fish he gave gills and fins, perfect adaptations for underwater life. To some animals he gave sharp teeth and claws, making them fierce predators. To others he gave speed or camouflage or armor, defensive traits that would help them avoid being eaten. He gave bears thick fur and great strength. He gave deer incredible speed and keen hearing. He gave moles the ability to dig through earth, and beavers the instinct to build dams. He gave snakes venom and camouflage. He gave eagles sharp eyes that could spot prey from miles away. He gave wolves pack instincts and endurance for long hunts. He was having a wonderful time, and he went through his store of gifts with abandon, with generosity, with a kind of joyful creativity that came from being useful, from contributing to something important. Each animal he equipped, he did so with care, thinking about what would work best for that particular creature, until he got to humans, and discovered too late that he had nothing left to give them. Every single attribute, every survival skill, every advantage had been distributed to the animals. The eagle got the eyes, the bear got the strength, the deer got the speed, the snake got the venom. There was nothing left. The metaphorical cupboard was bare. And humans, the last creatures on his list, were left naked, weak, slow, with no natural weapons, no protective covering, no special abilities whatsoever. They were, by comparison to the well-equipped animals around them, pathetically vulnerable, inferior in every measurable way. They couldn't outrun predators, they couldn't outfight them. They couldn't fly away or burrow to safety or defend themselves with claws or horns or stingers. Epimetheus stared at the humans in horror, realizing what he had done, or rather what he had failed to do. This was exactly the kind of mistake his name predicted. He had acted without thinking ahead, had given away all the resources without considering whether he'd have enough for everyone. And now there were these beings, these humans, standing before him, expecting to be equipped for survival, and he had nothing to give them. This was the pattern of Epimetheus's life, well-meaning, good-hearted even, but profoundly lacking in foresight. If he had just planned ahead, had just made a list, had just thought about what he was doing before he did it, humanity wouldn't have been left defenseless. Prometheus had to step in, of course. He saw what his brother had done, saw the humans standing there unprepared for the harsh world they'd been born into, and he felt that characteristic compassion rising in his chest. This wasn't their fault. They didn't deserve to suffer because Epimetheus had been careless. So Prometheus gave humans what he could. He made them walk upright like the gods, giving them dignity and a vantage point that let them see farther. He gave them clever hands with opposable thumbs, capable of using tools, of manipulating their environment. He gave them large brains relative to their body size, the capacity for thought and reason and innovation. And most crucially, he gave them fire, though that would come later, after the initial creation. But it shouldn't have been necessary. If Epimetheus had just planned ahead, humanity would have been properly equipped from the start. They wouldn't have needed Prometheus's rescue. They wouldn't have become the objects of his special care and attention, which ultimately led to his torture and humanity's punishment. In a way, everything that followed, all the suffering and sorrow, can be traced back to that initial moment of thoughtlessness. Epimetheus's failure to plan ahead set in motion a chain of events that would reshape the world. But Epimetheus, true to his nature, probably didn't dwell on this. He likely felt bad about it for a while, then moved on to whatever was in front of him at the moment, allowing Prometheus to handle the consequences. That was their dynamic. Prometheus thought ahead. Epimetheus thought afterward. Prometheus fixed problems. Epimetheus created them, usually unintentionally. So, when Prometheus was taken to the Caucasus to be bound and tortured, when his punishment was secured, and there was nothing Epimetheus could do to help him, Prometheus's final words to his brother were a warning. Never accept a gift from Zeus. Listen to me, Epimetheus, I know you. I know how you are. You act on impulse, you see something appealing, and you take it without thinking about why it's being offered. But you cannot do that with Zeus. Zeus does not give gifts. He sets traps. Anything that comes from him, anything at all, will bring ruin. Promise me that if Zeus offers you anything, you will refuse it. Think about it. Consider it. Remember my warning. And say no. Epimetheus, standing there watching his brother be dragged away to unimaginable punishment, swore he would remember, swore he would be careful, swore he would not forget. He meant it too. In that moment, with his brother's suffering fresh and real, he absolutely intended to heed the warning. And then sometime later, when the memory had faded a bit, when the urgency of that moment had dulled, when Epimetheus had returned to his daily life and stopped thinking quite so much about his brother's torture, Hermes appeared at his door. The messenger god stood there, radiant and charming in the way Hermes always was, with his winged sandals and his caduceus, his clever eyes and his practiced smile. And beside him stood the most beautiful woman, Epimetheus had ever seen. Pandora, dressed in silver that caught the light, crowned with flowers that perfumed the air, wearing golden necklaces that gleamed against her throat, moving with a grace that seemed almost to defy gravity. Looking at Epimetheus with eyes that held depths he immediately wanted to explore, the moment Epimetheus saw her, the warning evaporated from his mind. Every caution Prometheus had given him, every careful word of advice, every explicit instruction to refuse gifts from Zeus, all of it simply vanished, because she was so beautiful, so graceful. The way she moved, the sound of her voice when she greeted him, the way the light caught in her hair. Aphrodite's gift was working exactly as intended. Epimetheus felt his breath catch, felt his heart race, felt an overwhelming, irrational certainty that this woman was meant to be his. Hermes, watching this unfold with barely concealed amusement, played his part perfectly. He presented Pandora as a gift from Zeus, a bride for Epimetheus, a companion to ease his loneliness. Wasn't she lovely? Wasn't she perfect? Zeus, in his generosity, had created her specifically for Epimetheus, a reward perhaps for Epimetheus's loyalty during the war, or simply a kindness from the king of the gods. Either way, here she was, beautiful, perfect, his. Epimetheus should have said no, should have remembered his brother's warning, should have seen the trap closing around him, sprung by his own inability to think ahead, to consider consequences, to resist immediate gratification, should have looked at this too perfect woman and this too generous gift and recognized that something was wrong. But he didn't. He couldn't. All he could think about was how much he wanted her to stay, how empty his life had been before this moment, how right it felt to have her standing there in his doorway, smiling at him with those perfect lips, looking at him with those fathomless eyes. So he said yes, of course he said yes. He welcomed Pandora into his home, accepted her from Hermes' hands, and thanked Zeus's messenger with genuine gratitude. He forgot every warning, forgot every lesson, forgot everything except the sight of her and the way she made him feel. And Hermes, mission accomplished, departed with a knowing smile. He'd been around long enough to recognize this pattern, the pattern of someone walking willingly into a trap because the bait was too appealing to resist. He'd seen it with mortals countless times, but seeing it with a titan, a being who should have known better, that was particularly satisfying. Epimetheus and Pandora were married, and for a time everything was wonderful. She was kind to him, or seemed to be, attentive. She learned quickly, her hands skillful at the loom Athena had taught her to use, creating beautiful fabrics for their home. She made their dwelling a pleasant place. She smiled at him, laughed with him, and Epimetheus thought himself the luckiest being alive. He didn't notice, or chose not to notice, the jar that had come with her, the large clay vessel that sat in the corner of their home, heavy-lidded and mysterious. When he asked about it, Pandora explained that it was a wedding gift from Zeus himself. Something precious, she said, something valuable. But Zeus had instructed her never to open it. At this, some small alarm should have gone off in Epimetheus's mind. A gift from Zeus that couldn't be opened? A mystery that was forbidden? That sounded exactly like the kind of trap Prometheus had warned him about. But Epimetheus was already committed, already married, already in love, or what he believed was love, though it was more likely Aphrodite's magic working on him. And he rationalized it. Yes, it was from Zeus. Yes, it was mysterious. But it was sealed. It wasn't going to be opened. So there was no danger, right? As long as the jar stayed closed, everything would be fine. So in a rare moment of caution, probably the only such moment in his entire life, Epimetheus told Pandora firmly that they should never open the jar, that gifts from Zeus were not to be trusted, that whatever was inside, it was better left sealed. They would keep the jar because throwing it away might offend Zeus, but they would never, ever look inside. And Pandora agreed. Of course she agreed. She placed the jar in a safe spot, somewhere it wouldn't be accidentally knocked over or broken, and went about her days, learning to be human, learning to be a wife, navigating this strange new world she'd been created into. But Hermes had given her curiosity, endless, gnawing, insatiable curiosity. And that jar, unopened and mysterious, sat there day after day after day. A question she could not answer, a secret she could not know, a temptation that grew stronger with every passing hour. What was inside? Why was it forbidden? What could possibly be so important that Zeus himself had sealed it and commanded it never be opened? The not knowing became a weight, and eventually, inevitably, that weight would become too much to bear. Imagine living with a locked box in your home, a box you've been told never to open. You don't know what's inside. You don't know why it's forbidden. You only know that you must not, under any circumstances, lift the lid. At first it's easy. There are so many other things to think about, so many distractions. Pandora was new to the world, new to being human, new to being married. There was so much to learn, so much to discover. The rhythms of daily life consumed her attention. Waking with the sun, preparing food, tending the home, learning the patterns of her husband's moods, his preferences, his needs. She spent hours at the loom, her fingers moving through the threads with increasing skill, creating patterns that pleased her, fabrics that made Epimetheus smile with pride. She learned which herbs grew wild in the fields and could be used in cooking, which flowers made the house smell pleasant, which tasks needed doing at what time of day. There was a whole world to explore, and at first, the jar was just one object among many, no more significant than the cooking pots, or the sleeping furs, or the grinding stone for grain. But as days turned to weeks, as the novelty of her new life began to wear off, as the routines became familiar and required less conscious thought, the jar began to occupy more and more of her mind. She would walk past it, and her eyes would linger, just for a moment, just a glance, but each glance was a question she couldn't answer. What was inside? The jar was beautiful in its own way, the clay smooth and well-fired, the lid fitted precisely. It stood perhaps waist-high, large enough to hold substantial contents, heavy enough that when she'd accidentally brushed against it once, it hadn't budged. Whatever was inside had weight, substance. She would find herself standing in front of it, staring, wondering, lost in speculation until Epimetheus called her name or some task required her attention. Then she'd shake herself, turn away, go about her business. But the jar would be there, waiting when she returned. At night, lying beside her husband in the darkness, she would think about it. Picture it sitting in the next room, silent, mysterious. She would imagine scenarios. Maybe it was treasure, gold coins or precious gems, a dowry from Zeus, riches to secure their future. Maybe it was beautiful clothing, more silver gowns like the one she wore, finery befitting her divine creation. Maybe it was tools or implements, useful things for building a life. Maybe it was empty. Maybe the whole thing was a test, a joke, a way to see if she could resist temptation. Maybe Zeus had given her an empty jar just to see how long she could go without looking inside. The thought made her angry. Why would he do that? Why create someone with curiosity and then punish them for being curious? Or maybe it was something dangerous. Maybe the prohibition was genuine, meant to protect her. Maybe inside was something terrible, something that would hurt her if released. Poison, perhaps. Or a wild animal, somehow kept dormant, that would attack if given the chance. Or a curse waiting to be activated. But that didn't make sense either. Why would Zeus give them something dangerous? Why bring it into their home at all? The not knowing became a weight, a persistent nagging pressure that sat in the back of her mind, no matter what else she was doing. She could be engaged in conversation with Epimetheus, laughing at something he said, and beneath the laughter would be the thought, what's in the jar? She could be working at the loom, her hands busy, her eyes focused, and the question would whisper, what's in the jar? She tried to ignore it, tried to focus on other things, tried to fill her days so completely that there would be no room for curiosity. She took on more tasks, more projects. She walked farther from home, exploring the countryside, gathering plants and stones and anything that caught her eye. She engaged Epimetheus in longer conversations, asking him about his life before she arrived, about his brothers, about the world, anything to keep her mind occupied. But it didn't work. The question was always there, lurking, waiting for any moment of quiet or boredom to surge back to the forefront of her thoughts. What's in the jar? What's in the jar? What's in the jar? And the more she tried not to think about it, the more she thought about it. Because that's how human minds work, isn't it? That's how Hermes had designed her mind to work. Tell someone not to think about a white elephant, and suddenly white elephants are all they can picture. Tell Pandora not to wonder about the jar, and the jar becomes the center of her universe. She began to resent it. Not just the jar, but the prohibition. Why shouldn't she know what was in her own home? Why should she have to live with this mystery, this unanswered question, this constant weight of not knowing? She hadn't asked for the jar. She hadn't asked to be created. She'd been made by the gods, given to Epimetheus, presented with this sealed vessel, and told to simply accept it without understanding. It wasn't fair, and yet she'd promised. Epimetheus had been so serious when he'd asked her never to open it, so concerned, so emphatic. She'd agreed because she loved him, or at least cared for him, or at least wanted to be a good wife. The jar was clearly important to him. His warning about Zeus giving dangerous gifts seemed genuine, rooted in experience or knowledge she didn't have. If she opened it against his wishes, it would be a betrayal of his trust. That thought held her back. For a while, days stretched into weeks. Weeks stretched into months, maybe even years, depending on which version of the story you read. And through all that time, the jar sat there, silent and sealed and endlessly mysterious. Pandora developed strategies to cope with the curiosity. She would recite to herself all the reasons not to open it. Epimetheus had asked her not to. Zeus had commanded it be sealed. Whatever was inside might be dangerous. Opening it would be disobedient, reckless, wrong. She would list these reasons, count them on her fingers, use them as a kind of shield against the urge to lift the lid. But then she would think, what if it's not dangerous? What if it's wonderful? What if inside is something that could make their lives better, easier, happier, and she's denying them that blessing out of blind obedience to a rule that makes no sense? She would argue with herself back and forth, the way people do when they're trying to rationalize something they want to do, but know they shouldn't. Part of her was the voice of caution, repeating the warnings, urging restraint. Part of her was the voice of curiosity, whispering seductively about all the possibilities, building elaborate justifications for why it would be okay to just take one little peek. She imagined scenarios where opening the jar would be the right thing to do. Maybe there was someone trapped inside, magically shrunken, waiting to be freed. Maybe there was a message from Zeus explaining everything, and she was supposed to read it. Maybe the jar wasn't meant to stay sealed forever, just for a certain period of time, and that time had passed. Maybe. The mental gymnastics were exhausting, and through it all, the jar sat there, unmoved, unchanged, offering no answers. Epimetheus noticed her distraction, of course. Sometimes he would find her standing in front of the jar, lost in thought, and he would gently pull her away, remind her of the warning, try to redirect her attention. "Come," he would say, "let's walk by the river, let's gather berries, let's do anything except stand here staring at that thing." And she would go with him, grateful for the distraction, and for a few hours she would forget. But then they would return home, and there it would be, waiting. She considered asking Epimetheus if they could get rid of it. Just take it out of the house, bury it somewhere, throw it in a river, smash it to pieces and scatter the shards, remove the temptation entirely. But she never quite worked up the courage to suggest it, because she knew what he would say. It was a gift from Zeus. You don't destroy gifts from the king of the gods. You certainly don't show such disrespect. They had to keep it. They just also had to not open it. So the jar remained. And the curiosity grew. It became an obsession. Not a violent, consuming madness, but a persistent, gnawing thing that never quite went away. Like a stone in your shoe that you can't remove. A mild but constant discomfort that colors everything else you do. Pandora could still function, still work, still maintain her relationship with Epimetheus, but there was always this undercurrent of distraction, this part of her mind that was perpetually occupied with the question of the jar. She began to have dreams about it. Dreams where she opened the jar and beautiful things poured out. Flowers, butterflies, sweet music, golden light. Dreams where she opened it and nothing happened. It was simply empty. and she felt foolish for having worried. Dreams where she opened it and terrible things emerged, shadows and screams and chaos, and she woke in a cold sweat, heart pounding, relieved it was only a dream. But the dreams didn't satisfy the curiosity. If anything, they made it worse, because now her sleeping mind was as preoccupied with the jar as her waking mind. There was no escape from it. She tried to reason with herself. "It's just a jar," she would think. "Just clay and contents. It doesn't define you, it doesn't control you. You're stronger than this. You can let it go." But she couldn't. The curiosity that Hermes had planted in her, that Zeus had intended as part of his trap, was not something she could simply will away. It was fundamental to her nature now, as much a part of her as her heartbeat or her breath. She could no more stop being curious than she could stop being alive. And somewhere, far away on Mount Olympus, Zeus watched and waited. He knew how this would end. He had designed it to end only one way. The question was not if Pandora would open the jar, but when. The trap was set. The spring was loaded. All it would take was one moment of weakness, one lapse in vigilance, one decision made in isolation when the weight of not knowing finally became too much to bear. That moment was coming. It was inevitable. Hermes had made sure of it when he gave Pandora her defining trait. Epimetheus had made sure of it when he accepted her into his home, despite his brother's warning. Zeus had made sure of it when he sealed the jar and commanded it never be opened. All the pieces were in place. All that remained was for Pandora to do what she had been created to do. To wonder, to question, to reach for knowledge even when told it was forbidden, to lift the lid. What came out of that jar was not treasure, not beauty, not gifts or blessings or anything remotely good. What came out was every form of suffering humanity had never known. They poured forth like smoke, like shadows, like a flood that could not be stopped. Spirits, demons, forces without form, but with terrible purpose. They escaped into the air, spreading, multiplying, rushing out into the world with a speed that left Pandora frozen in horror. The first thing she noticed was the smell, a rot, a decay, sweet and cloying and wrong. It hit her like a physical force, making her gag, making her eyes water, and with that smell came the first of the evils. Disease manifested as a writhing mass of shadows, each tendril a different sickness waiting to infect humanity. Plague emerged in billowing clouds of darkness, the kind that would sweep through villages and leave mass graves in its wake. Fevers that would burn through bodies, consuming them from within. Infections that would fester in wounds, turning small injuries into death sentences. Cancers that would grow silently, unseen, eating away at organs until it was far too late. These diseases were intelligent in their way. They knew how to spread, how to mutate, how to hide from the body's defenses. They knew how to make mothers watch their children die, how to cripple the strong, how to rob the old of dignity. They poured out of the jar in waves, eager to find their first hosts, eager to begin the endless work of making humans suffer. Old age followed, and this was perhaps cruelest of all. Not the gentle aging of the Golden Age, where people lived centuries and remained vital until the very end. No. This was the harsh aging we know now, the slow, inevitable decay of the body. It came in forms both visible and invisible, joints that would stiffen and ache, making every movement a reminder of diminishment, sight that would dim until the world became a blur. Hearing that would fade until even beloved voices became whispers you had to strain to catch. Memory would crumble, and this might be the worst part, the self-eroding from within. Forgetting names, faces, moments that once seemed unforgettable. Becoming a stranger to yourself. Becoming a burden to those you love. Watching yourself disappear piece by piece, while still being aware enough to mourn what was lost. And beyond the physical decline, old age brought the knowledge of mortality itself, the awareness that time was finite, that each day brought you closer to an end you could not prevent or escape. That's what old age really was, the slow walk toward death, feeling yourself weaken, feeling your body betray you, knowing how it would end but unable to stop it. Pain arrived in all its varieties, a multitude of sufferings, each distinct and terrible. Physical pain first, sharp and immediate, the agony of bones breaking, of flesh tearing, of burns, of bruises, of every injury a body could sustain. But also chronic pain, the kind that never quite goes away, the dull throb in the back that makes every day a trial, the ache in the joints that weather brings, the headaches that steal light and sound and leave you curled in darkness, begging for relief. And then emotional pain, which had no visible wound but cut deeper than any blade. Grief so heavy it crushed the chest, made breathing labor, made existence itself feel like punishment. The pain of losing someone you love, of having them there one moment and gone the next, leaving a hole in the world that nothing could fill. Heartbreak that made you question whether love was worth the risk. Loneliness that echoed in the bones. The awareness that you are fundamentally alone, separate, unable to truly connect no matter how desperately you try. Pain of rejection, of failure, of regret, of shame. Pain of watching your dreams die. Pain of being betrayed by someone you trusted. Pain of realizing you're not who you thought you were, not who you wanted to be. Pain in endless variations, each one a new way to suffer, each one emerging from the jar with hunger and purpose. Toil emerged like a great shadow, the end of ease, the beginning of struggle. No more would food appear unbidden from trees and fields. Now humans would have to till the soil, and the soil would resist. It would be hard, unyielding, full of rocks and roots and stubborn weeds. The sun would beat down mercilessly as they worked, burning skin, causing exhaustion. Their backs would ache from bending. Their hands would blister from tools. Their muscles would scream in protest. They would have to plant seeds and pray for rain, and sometimes the rain wouldn't come. Sometimes locusts would devour the crops. Sometimes disease would wither the plants. Sometimes, despite all the labor, there would be nothing to show for it but empty fields and empty stomachs. And it wasn't just agricultural labor. It was every form of work, every task that sustained life. Hauling water from distant wells because the nearby stream dried up. Repairing shelters damaged by storms. Making clothes because bodies now needed protection from the elements. Hunting animals and preserving meat because it spoiled quickly now. Gathering firewood because nights were cold and darkness was dangerous. Work would become the price of survival. The ease of the golden age, where life was simply lived and enjoyed, was over. Now life would be earned through sweat and strain and endless effort. Greed escaped the jar like a serpent, coiling and hissing, whispering lies about scarcity and need. It planted itself in human hearts and grew there like a weed. Where once people had been content, now they would want more. Always more, never satisfied, never enough. They would look at their neighbor's possessions with covetous eyes. Why does he have a larger field? Why does she have finer clothes? Why do they have more when I have less? The comparison would poison contentment. The grass would always seem greener on the other side of the fence, even when your own grass was perfectly adequate. Greed would drive people to lie, to cheat, to steal. It would make them value things over people. It would convince them that accumulation was the path to happiness, that whoever dies with the most wins, and it would never deliver on its promises, because greed by its nature can never be satisfied. The more you have, the more you want. The finish line keeps moving farther away. Envy slithered out, poisonous and green, the bitter twin of greed. Where greed was about wanting more, envy was about resenting others for having what you lacked. It was comparison turned malicious. It was the inability to feel joy for others' success, only sourness that they succeeded where you failed. Envy would make friends into rivals. It would turn achievements into competitions. It would poison celebrations with resentment. Someone gets married, and instead of feeling happy for them, you feel bitter that you're alone. Someone has a child, and instead of celebrating new life, you mourn your own childlessness or regret your choices. Someone prospers, and instead of being inspired, you feel diminished by their success. Envy would whisper that life is unfair, that you've been cheated, that you deserve what others have. It would make you small and mean and unable to appreciate your own blessings because you'd be too focused on what you lacked. Hatred erupted from the jar like fire, consuming everything it touched. That blinding rage that turns neighbor against neighbor, brother against brother. The capacity to despise, to wish harm, to feel that another person's very existence is an offense. Hatred based on differences, different beliefs, different appearances, different ways of living. Hatred based on injuries, real or perceived. Hatred that grows from fear, from misunderstanding, from the human tendency to divide the world into us and them. Hatred would lead to violence, to murder, to war, to atrocities committed in the name of righteousness or revenge or simply the pleasure of destruction. It would make people capable of inflicting suffering not just accidentally or in pursuit of some other goal, but deliberately, methodically savoring the pain they caused. Famine came, the specter of starvation, of crops failing and children dying. The terror of watching food run out and knowing there's no more coming. Bellies swollen not with fullness, but with the distension of starvation. Bodies wasting away, skins stretched tight over bones. The desperation that makes people eat things that aren't food, anything to fill the gnawing emptiness. The grief of parents watching children weaken, unable to help, unable to save them. Famine would teach humans about scarcity in its most brutal form, about rationing, about who gets to eat and who doesn't, about impossible choices and survivals bought at the price of someone else's death. War emerged in full armor, glorious and terrible, promising glory but delivering carnage. The organized violence that would pit community against community, nation against nation. Young men sent to fight and die for causes they barely understood. Fields turned into battlegrounds, soaked with blood. Cities besieged and starved until they surrendered, or everyone inside was dead. War would separate families. It would create widows and orphans. It would destroy in hours what had taken generations to build. It would leave scars on both land and people that would never fully heal. Lies slithered out like smoke, formless and pervasive. The capacity to speak untruth, to deceive, to manipulate through false words. Lies that would destroy trust. Lies that would break hearts. Lies told for gain or to avoid punishment or simply out of habit. Big lies that changed the course of history. Small lies that eroded relationships one deception at a time. And with lies came their companion, the inability to know truth, the confusion, the doubt. How can you trust anyone when lies are possible? How can you be certain of anything when deception exists? The very existence of lies would poison honesty, making every truth suspect. Betrayal emerged, the breaking of trust, the knife in the back from someone you thought was a friend, the spouse who breaks their vows, the friend who shares your secrets, the ally who switches sides when it's convenient, the family member who steals from you, the teacher who abuses their position. Every violation of trust, every breaking of bonds, every instance where someone you relied on proved unreliable. Betrayal hurts worse than enmity because it requires vulnerability first. You have to trust before you can be betrayed, and once betrayed, that ability to trust becomes damaged, making future connections harder, making you suspicious and guarded, even when it's not warranted. Despair poured out like thick darkness. The belief that nothing will ever get better, that hope is foolish, that giving up is the only rational response. The weight that makes getting out of bed feel impossible. The voice that whispers you're worthless, that your efforts are pointless, that the world would be better off without you. The numbness that steals color from the world and joy from experience. Despair would drive people to give up when they might have prevailed if they'd tried just a little longer. It would make them sabotage their own happiness out of the belief that they don't deserve good things. It would steal futures that could have been bright. And on and on and on. Fear in all its forms, fear of death, fear of pain, fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of the unknown. Jealousy that poisons relationships, vanity that makes people foolish, cruelty that takes pleasure in others' suffering, madness that steals reason and leaves chaos in its place. Every vice, every suffering, every form of misery that could afflict the human condition came pouring out of that jar. Countless spirits, countless evils, each one a new way for humans to suffer, to fail, to hurt. They filled the room, obscuring the light, making the air thick and hard to breathe. They swirled around Pandora like a vortex, touching her, marking her, claiming her as their vessel, their conduit into the world. And then they spread. Through the open door, through the windows, through every crack and crevice in the walls. They poured out into the world like water from a broken dam, unstoppable, irreversible. They rushed across the land, seeking humans, finding them, infecting them with all the suffering Zeus had intended. Pandora watched in mounting horror as the jar emptied. She tried to close the lid, but her hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip it. The evils were still pouring out, an endless stream of darkness and pain. She was sobbing now, great racking sobs that shook her whole body, realizing what she had done, realizing the magnitude of her mistake. The knowledge was crushing. She had done this. She and she alone. Epimetheus had warned her. Zeus had commanded the jar stay sealed, and she had opened it anyway because she couldn't resist the need to know, the cursed curiosity that Hermes had planted in her like a seed that was always meant to grow into exactly this kind of disaster. Finally, when the flood had slowed to a trickle, when the vast majority of the jar's contents had escaped into the world, she managed to slam the lid back down. The clay rim met the clay lid with a sound like finality, like the closing of a tomb. And in the sudden silence that followed, broken only by her ragged breathing and muffled sobs, she heard something. A small sound from inside the jar. A fluttering like wings. A voice, perhaps, though not in words she could understand. Something was still inside. One last spirit. One last thing that had not escaped. Pandora stood frozen, her hands still gripping the lid, tears streaming down her face. Should she open it again? Let this last thing out? Or keep it trapped, preserve it, save it from whatever fate awaited the others? But fear held her back. Fear of what else might be released. Fear of making the catastrophe even worse. Fear of her own weakness, her inability to control herself. If she lifted the lid again, even a crack, who's to say she wouldn't release something even more terrible? So she left it. She left the lid in place, trembling, weeping, her whole body shaking with the weight of what she had done. Inside the jar, trapped beneath the rim, hope remained. Elpis, the last spirit, the only one that didn't escape to plague the world. And when Epimetheus returned home, he found his wife weeping beside the jar, surrounded by the consequences of her curiosity. The room felt different. The air felt heavier. Something had changed, fundamentally and irreversibly. "What have you done?" he whispered, though he already knew. He could feel it. The world itself had shifted. The golden age, whatever remained of it, was truly over now. Pandora couldn't answer, couldn't form words, could only weep and weep and weep, knowing she had brought suffering into the world, knowing humanity would blame her for it, knowing she deserved that blame because she had been weak, because she had been curious, because she had been exactly what she was created to be. The trap had sprung. Zeus's revenge was complete. Prometheus had saved humanity by giving them fire, and now Pandora had damned them by releasing everything that would make them wish they'd never been born. The question now was, could they survive it? Could humanity endure this flood of evils, or would they be overwhelmed, destroyed, wiped from the earth like the Silver and Bronze Ages before them? The answer would depend perhaps on what remained in the jar, on whether hope, trapped and unable to escape, would prove to be blessing or curse, on whether humans could find within themselves the strength to continue even when everything had become so much harder than it had ever been before. The story wasn't over, it was just beginning. The real test of humanity was about to start. The figure of Elpis, hope personified, is one of the most debated elements of the entire myth, because on the surface it seems straightforward. All the evils escaped, but hope remained, and that's good, right? That means humanity, despite all its suffering, still has hope to sustain it. Hope is the light in the darkness, the thing that keeps us going when everything else falls apart. But the ancient Greeks didn't always see hope that way, and Hesiod, our source for this story, was notoriously pessimistic about the human condition. So let's dig into the ambiguity. Because it matters a great deal. First, the word itself. Elpis doesn't translate neatly into English. It can mean hope, in the sense we use it, the expectation of good things to come, but it can also mean expectation in a more neutral sense, or even anxiety, the anticipation of something good or bad. It's a word that encompasses a range of meanings, all related to the future, to things that have not yet happened. Now consider the jar. Is it a prison or a pantry? If the jar was full of evils, then keeping hope inside could mean hope was preserved for humanity. kept safe from the contamination of all those other terrible spirits. In this reading, hope is a blessing, the one good thing that didn't get spoiled, and it remains available to humans whenever they need it. Humans can reach into the jar of their own nature and pull out hope to sustain themselves. But if the jar is a prison and hope is trapped inside, then humanity is denied access to it. Hope is the one thing that could have made the evils bearable, and it's locked away, unreachable. Humans must face disease, pain, old age, and death without the comfort of hope. That's a much bleaker interpretation. And then there's the question of whether hope is even good. What if hope itself is another form of torture? Think about it. Hope means you believe things could get better. But what if they don't? What if hope is just delusion, the thing that keeps you expecting improvement that never comes? What if hope is what makes you endure suffering you should instead find a way to end? Nietzsche certainly thought so. In Human, All Too Human, he wrote that Zeus did not want humans to throw away their lives no matter how much they suffered. So he gave them hope, the most evil of evils, because it prolongs man's torment. Hope, in this view, is the cruelest trick of all. It keeps you going when you should give up. It makes you believe in rescue that will never arrive. Hesiod himself seems uncertain about hope. He describes it as being trapped in an unbreakable home within under the rim of the great jar, held back by the will of Zeus. Zeus ensured hope did not escape. Was that mercy or malice? The poet Theognis, writing a century or so after Hesiod, offers a different take. He writes that hope is the only good god remaining among mankind. The others have left and gone to Olympus. In Theognis's version, the jar contained blessings, not evils, and when it was opened, all the good things fled back to the heavens. Only hope stayed. Only hope remained with humanity. That's a gentler reading, one that paints hope as loyal, faithful, the one divine force that refused to abandon mortals. And there's yet another version, preserved by Aesop, where a foolish man opens a jar sent by Zeus that contained all the good things meant for humanity, and they escape, soaring back to the realm of the gods. Hope alone is caught when the lid is replaced. So which is it? Is hope a comfort or a curse? Is it inside the jar or has it escaped? Is it preserved for us or withheld from us? The answer, frustratingly, is that we don't know. Hesiod doesn't tell us. He simply reports that hope remained inside and moves on. The ambiguity might be intentional. Perhaps the point is that hope is all of these things, that it can be comfort and curse depending on the context, that it can sustain us and torment us in equal measure. What we do know is that after Pandora opened the jar, the world was never the same. The Golden Age was well and truly over. Whatever remained of that paradise was swept away in the flood of evils that poured out into the world. Humans would now know suffering, real, grinding, inescapable suffering, and they would have to find a way to live with it. But Pandora's story doesn't end with the opening of the jar. She had to live with what she had done. She had to watch the consequences spread. She had to bear the weight of knowing she had brought this upon the world. In Hesiod's telling, Pandora is not portrayed sympathetically. She is described as a beautiful evil, a creation designed to punish men. Her curiosity is framed not as understandable human nature, but as a flaw, a weakness inherent to women. Hesiod was, to put it mildly, not a fan of womankind. He writes that, "From her is the race of women and female kind, of her is the deadly race and tribe of women who live amongst mortal men to their great trouble, no helpmeets in hateful poverty, but only in wealth." That's harsh. That's suggesting that women as a category are fundamentally parasitic, useful only when times are good, burdensome when times are bad. It's misogyny, plain and simple, the kind that was unfortunately quite common in ancient Greece. But let's take a step back from Hesiod's biases and think about Pandora herself. She was created by the gods. Every aspect of her being was designed by divine hands. The curiosity that compelled her to open the jar wasn't something she chose. It was something Hermes put into her mind at Zeus's command. She was set up to fail, programmed to open the jar. She was a bomb with a timer, and the only question was when she would go off, not if. In that light, Blaming Pandora for opening the jar is like blaming the arrow for the wound instead of the archer who shot it. She was a weapon, wielded by Zeus, aimed at humanity. Her agency in the matter is questionable at best. Modern retellings and interpretations have tried to reclaim Pandora, to view her not as a source of evil, but as a more complex figure. Some see her as a symbol of the human thirst for knowledge, the drive to understand, to question, to refuse to accept limitations. Yes, opening the jar brought suffering, but it also brought awareness. Humans could no longer live in ignorant bliss, but ignorant bliss is, perhaps, not a state worth preserving. There's a feminist reading of the myth that sees Pandora's story as an example of how patriarchal societies scapegoat women, blaming them for humanity's ills. Just as Eve was blamed for the fall in Christian tradition, Pandora was blamed for the introduction of suffering. Both women disobeyed, both were curious, and both bore the weight of collective human misery on their shoulders. It's a pattern, and it's worth examining. But we should also note that Pandora was not entirely alone in facing the consequences. Epimetheus, her husband, shared in the aftermath. Their home was no longer the easy paradise it might have been. They too would have to labor, to age, to suffer disease and pain. They were the first to experience the new reality they had helped create. And they had a child, a daughter named Pyrrha, the first child born of a mortal mother rather than created by the gods. Pyrrha would grow up in this new, harsher world, and she would marry Deucalion, the son of Prometheus. Together, Pyrrha and Deucalion would survive the great flood Zeus sent to cleanse the earth of wicked humanity, and they would repopulate the world by throwing stones over their shoulders, which transformed into people. So Pandora's legacy is not just suffering, it's also survival. It's the continuation of the human race. It's the thread that connects one age to the next. But none of that changes the immediate reality of what happened when the jar was opened. The evils were loose, the world was changed, and humanity had to adapt. After the jar was opened, life became difficult, not impossible, not unbearable in the sense that humans couldn't continue, but hard. The kind of hard that grinds you down day by day, year by year. Imagine waking up one morning with a pain in your chest that wasn't there before. A tightness, a dull ache. You ignore it at first, push through, but it doesn't go away. Days pass, and it gets worse. You realize with growing dread that this is not something that will heal on its own. This is disease, this new thing that has entered the world, and you have no idea how to fight it. There are no doctors, no medicines, no knowledge of what's happening inside your body. You can only wait and hope and watch yourself weaken. Or imagine working in the fields from dawn until dusk, your hands blistered, your back screaming in protest, and at the end of the day, you have barely enough to feed your family. The soil is no longer as generous as it once was. The plants require tending, constant vigilance against pests and weather. One bad season and you starve. There's no safety net, no abundance, just the endless, exhausting labor of survival. Or imagine watching your parents age, watching them go from strong, capable people to frail shadows of themselves, watching them forget things, watching them struggle to walk, to see, to hear, watching them diminish, and knowing that one day, that will be you. That time is no longer your ally, but your enemy, slowly eroding everything you are. This was the new normal, and humans had to learn to cope. They developed agriculture, yes, because they had to. They learned to tend crops, to irrigate fields, to store grain for lean times. They learned to hunt more efficiently, to fish, to domesticate animals. They built shelters to protect themselves from weather that was no longer always kind. They created tools to make labor easier, weapons to defend against threats. But they also had to learn to cope emotionally, psychologically. They had to figure out how to keep going when everything was so much harder than it had been. And this is where the question of hope becomes so important. Because in the absence of hope, why bother? If you know you're going to suffer, if you know that no matter how hard you work, disease or disaster or death will eventually claim you, why keep going? Why plant seeds in the spring when you might not live to see the harvest? Why have children when you know they'll suffer as you have? Why build anything when everything crumbles eventually? Hope is the answer to that question. Hope is what makes humans plant those seeds anyway. Hope is what makes parents believe their children will have a better life, despite all evidence to the contrary. Hope is what keeps someone fighting an illness when all logic says they should give up. Hope is irrational and beautiful and necessary. If hope is trapped in the jar, if it's inaccessible to humans, then they have to create it themselves. They have to decide to hope without divine assistance. And maybe that's actually more powerful. Maybe hope that you choose, hope that you generate from within despite having no good reason to do so, is stronger than hope that's simply given to you. Or maybe hope is accessible. Maybe it lives inside every human, a tiny flame that can be kindled even in the darkest times. Maybe when Pandora slammed the lid down, she preserved hope from being corrupted by the other evils, kept it pure, kept it safe. And maybe that's why even now, even after all this time, even after millennia of suffering, humans can still hope. The Greek poet Pindar, writing later, suggested that without hope humans would simply lie down and die. Hope is what gets you out of bed in the morning. Hope is what makes you believe tomorrow might be better than today. Hope is the refusal to accept that this, right here, right now, is all there is. And whether that's a blessing or a curse depends perhaps on your perspective, on your life, on what you've survived and what you believe is still possible. Let's address the translation issue, because it's become such a significant part of the myth's legacy that we can't ignore it. Pandora never had a box. In Hesiod's original Greek, the object she opened was a pythos, which is a large ceramic storage jar, the kind you'd use to store grain or wine or olive oil, big, clay, often partially buried in the floor of a house to keep contents cool. Sometimes these jars were even used for burials, the body curled inside, the dead returning to the earth in a vessel that once held sustenance. So how did we end up with Pandora's box? The answer is Erasmus. Desiderius Erasmus, the 16th century Dutch humanist, was translating Hesiod's work from Greek into Latin. When he encountered the word pythos, he translated it as pyxis, which means box or casket. It's unclear if this was a genuine mistake or a deliberate choice to make the image more relatable to a European audience, but either way, it stuck. By the time the myth made its way into English and other modern languages, box had become the standard translation. Pandora's box is the phrase everyone knows. It's become an idiom. When we say someone opened Pandora's box, we mean they did something that unleashed unforeseen consequences, started a chain reaction of problems, released something that can't be put back. But there's something lost in that translation. A jar and a box are different objects with different connotations. A box is small, portable, tidy. It can be hidden easily. It's discreet. A jar, especially a large storage jar, is substantial. It's part of the household. It sits there, unmissable, a constant presence. You can't forget about a pythos the way you might forget about a small box tucked away in a corner. A jar also has different symbolic associations. Jars hold sustenance, the things that keep you alive. They're vessels of plenty in good times, vessels of scarcity in bad. And in the context of burial, they're vessels for the dead, containers for souls. The idea that all the evils of the world came from a jar, a thing meant to hold what sustains you, is deeply ironic. It's a perversion of the jar's purpose. Moreover, the fact that the jar was likely large changes the mental image of Pandora opening it. She's not gingerly lifting the lid of a small jewelry box. She's removing the heavy lid of a substantial vessel, something that requires effort, something that once unsealed would be hard to reseal quickly. It makes her actions more deliberate, less casual. But Pandora's box is what we're stuck with, at least in popular usage. And honestly, it works as a metaphor. The specifics of the container matter less than what it represents. Forbidden knowledge, curiosity leading to consequence, the irreversible nature of certain actions. Once the box is opened, you can't close it again and pretend nothing happened. Once the evils are released, they can't be stuffed back inside. What's done is done. That's the lesson the phrase carries. And it's a lesson that resonates regardless of whether we're talking about a box or a jar. Pandora's story has echoed through Western culture for thousands of years. It's been retold, reinterpreted, reimagined countless times. Artists have painted her, sculptors have carved her, poets have written about her. She appears in literature, in music, in film. Renaissance artists were particularly fascinated by Pandora. They painted her at the moment of opening the jar, surrounded by swirling shadows representing the escaping evils. They painted her in moments of regret, face twisted in horror as she realizes what she's done. They painted her as a lesson, a warning about the dangers of female curiosity in keeping with the misogyny of their own time. But they also painted her as beautiful, always beautiful, because that was part of the point. She was designed to be irresistible, and that remained true across centuries of artistic interpretation. In more modern times, Pandora has been reclaimed and reimagined as a more sympathetic figure, a victim of divine manipulation, a woman punished for doing exactly what she was created to do, a scapegoat for humanity's suffering when the real culprit was Zeus and his need for revenge. The myth has been compared inevitably to the story of Eve in the book of Genesis. Both are the first women of their respective traditions. Both disobey a command. Both bring suffering into the world through their actions. Both are blamed to varying degrees for the fallen state of humanity. But there are differences. Eve is tempted by the serpent, given a reason to eat the forbidden fruit. It promises knowledge, godlike understanding. Pandora is simply curious, and her jar offers no such promise. Eve's disobedience is framed as original sin, the source of all human moral failing. Pandora's action is more like an accident, a mistake with terrible consequences, but not necessarily a moral transgression. Both myths, though, serve a similar cultural function. They explain why the world is the way it is, why we suffer, why we toil, why we die. They give a narrative framework to pain, a story that makes the incomprehensible somewhat more bearable. And both myths, it should be noted, place a woman at the center of humanity's fall from grace. That's not a coincidence. It reflects the gender dynamics of the societies that produced these stories, societies where women had limited power, but could nonetheless be blamed for catastrophe. The difference in modern times is that we can look at these myths critically. We can recognize the misogyny embedded in them while still appreciating the deeper questions they raise. Questions about curiosity, about knowledge, about the price we pay for understanding, about the nature of hope and suffering. Pandora's box has become shorthand for any situation where a well-meaning action unleashes chaos. Scientists talk about opening Pandora's box when discussing technologies with unpredictable consequences. Politicians use the phrase when debating policies that might have far-reaching effects. It's become part of our cultural vocabulary, a way of expressing the anxiety that comes with not knowing what will happen when we take a certain action. But it's worth remembering that in the original myth, Pandora didn't know what was in the jar. She wasn't warned that it contained evils. She was just told not to open it. The mystery itself was the temptation. And that's very human, isn't it? We want to know. We need to know, even when knowing might hurt us. So what do we do with this myth? What does it teach us, if anything, here in the 21st century, thousands of years removed from the society that created it? On one level, it's a cautionary tale about curiosity, about the dangers of seeking knowledge without understanding the consequences. But that reading feels incomplete, because curiosity is also what drives progress. It's what makes us explore, discover, invent, create. A world where no one ever questioned, no one ever wondered, no one ever took risks, would be stagnant, dead. So maybe the lesson isn't don't be curious. Maybe it's be aware that actions have consequences, and some consequences can't be undone. That once you learn something, you can't unlearn it. Once you do something, you can't undo it. The jar, once opened, can't be sealed as though it had never been opened. That's a valuable lesson. It encourages us to think before we act, to consider the potential outcomes of our choices. But it shouldn't paralyze us. Because if we never took risks for fear of consequences, we'd never do anything at all. The myth also explores the theme of divine punishment and human suffering. Zeus creates Pandora explicitly to punish humanity for Prometheus's theft of fire. She is an instrument of revenge, and the evils she releases are, in this framework, retribution for human transgression. But that's Zeus's perspective. From the human perspective, the punishment is wildly disproportionate to the crime. Prometheus stole fire to help humans survive and thrive. In return, Humanity is cursed with disease, pain, and death. That's not justice, that's cruelty. Not. And yet suffering exists. We get sick, we grow old, we die. We toil for our survival. Those things are real regardless of whether you believe in Greek gods or not. The myth is trying to make sense of that reality, to give it a narrative framework. It's a theodicy, an attempt to explain why a world created by powerful beings includes so much pain. The answer the myth offers is complicated. It suggests that suffering is punishment which is unsatisfying. It suggests that suffering is the result of curiosity, of disobedience, of a woman's weakness, which is even less satisfying and frankly offensive. But it also offers hope, literally. Hope remains whether trapped or preserved or both. And that suggests that no matter how bad things get, there's always the possibility of something better. The capacity to believe in improvement, in healing, in change. And maybe that's the real takeaway. Not that suffering is inevitable, though it is. Not that we should blame women or curiosity or the gods for our problems. But that in the face of suffering, hope is what allows us to continue. Hope is the thing that makes life bearable. Hope is irrational. It flies in the face of evidence. It believes things will get better, even when all logic says they won't. And yet, without it, we're lost. Without hope, there's no reason to keep going. No reason to plant those seeds, to build those homes, to have those children, to create anything at all. Pandora's story, for all its darkness, is ultimately about that. About the human capacity to endure, to suffer and yet continue. To face a world full of pain and still find reasons to smile, to laugh, to love. Because the evils are out there. Disease and death and heartbreak and loss, they're part of the world now, part of our existence. We can't put them back in the jar. We can't return to the golden age if it ever existed at all. But we can choose hope. We can choose to believe that tomorrow might be better than today. We can choose to keep going, to keep trying, to keep building, despite everything. And maybe that's the most human thing of all. Here's the thing about Pandora's box. We never stop opening it. Every generation, every person, every moment we're presented with choices, actions that might have consequences we can't foresee, knowledge we might not be ready for, doors we're told not to open, and we open them anyway, because that's what humans do. We're curious, we're ambitious, we want to know, to understand, to push boundaries. We split atoms and splice genes and build artificial intelligences and send probes to distant planets. We ask questions that maybe don't have answers, pursue knowledge that might bring as much harm as good. We are, in our way, constantly recreating Pandora's dilemma. Standing before the jar, knowing we've been warned, knowing there might be consequences, but unable to resist the urge to lift the lid. And yes, sometimes that brings suffering. New technologies bring new problems. Nuclear power also means nuclear weapons. Medical advances that extend life also create ethical dilemmas about what life means. Social media connects us and isolates us in equal measure. Every advancement, every discovery, every innovation has a shadow side. But we don't stop. We can't stop. Because stopping means stagnation, and stagnation means death in a different way. We have to keep moving forward, keep learning, keep growing, even knowing that we'll make mistakes. Even knowing that some of those mistakes will have terrible consequences. The difference between us and Pandora, perhaps, is that we're making the choice knowingly. We're aware of the risks, at least to some extent. We open the jar with our eyes open, accepting that what comes out might hurt us. And when it does, when the evils escape and we're left dealing with the fallout, we rely on the same thing Pandora's story says remained in the jar. Hope. Hope that we can mitigate the damage. Hope that we can learn from our mistakes. Hope that the next generation will be wiser than we were. Hope that for all the pain we cause, we also create enough beauty, enough love, enough meaning to justify the cost. Because that's the bargain, isn't it? Existence is painful. It always has been from the moment the jar was opened, real or metaphorical. But it's also extraordinary. It's also full of moments that take your breath away, connections that sustain you, experiences that make you grateful to be alive. The evils are real, but so is everything else. We've spent a long time with Pandora tonight, with her creation, her purpose, her moment of fatal curiosity. We've looked at the jar and what came out of it. We've wrestled with the question of hope, whether it's blessing or curse, accessible or withheld. But maybe the most important thing about this myth is not what it tells us about the gods, or about women, or even about the origins of suffering. Maybe the most important thing is what it tells us about ourselves. We are the inheritors of Pandora's choice. We live in the world the jar created, a world where suffering is real, where death comes for everyone, where nothing lasts forever. We know pain, we know loss, we know disappointment and fear and grief. And yet, here we are, still planting seeds, still building homes, still falling in love and having children and creating art and telling stories and reaching for the stars, still hoping, against all evidence, against all logic, that things can be better. That is what makes us human. Not our intelligence, though we have that, not our creativity, though we have that too, but our ability to suffer and yet continue, to face the void and refuse to let it consume us, to know that death is certain and still choose to live as fully as we can in the time we have. Pandora opened the jar. That's done. It can't be undone. The evils are out there and they will find us, every single one of us, in time. But if hope is in the jar, then it's also in us. Because we are the jar. We are the vessels that hold both suffering and hope, both despair and joy, both darkness and light. And every day we choose which to feed, which to nurture, which to let grow. The gods may have created Pandora to punish humanity, but they gave us something they didn't intend. They gave us the knowledge that we can endure, that we're stronger than our suffering, that hope, however you define it, however irrational it may be, is enough to keep us going. So when you face your own jar, your own forbidden knowledge, your own moment of choice, remember Pandora. Remember that curiosity is human, that mistakes are inevitable, that consequences can't always be foreseen. But also remember that you're not alone in the aftermath, that generations of humans have opened their own jars, released their own evils, and still found the strength to carry on. That hope, whatever it is, wherever it lives, is yours if you choose to hold on to it. The jar is open. It has been for thousands of years. The evils are out there and they always will be. But so are you. Still here, still hoping, still human. And that, in the end, might be the greatest gift of all. If this story helped you find some peace tonight, consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. We dive into myths and legends from around the world, always with this same gentle approach, always with respect for the stories and for you, the listener. Let me know in the comments which myth you'd like to hear next. And wherever you are in the world, whatever time it is, I hope you rest well. I hope your dreams are kind. And I hope that when you wake, you'll find just a little bit of hope waiting for you, ready to face another day. Until next time, sleep well. And may the old stories comfort you as they have comforted so many before. Good night.